Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Shoulder Physio podcast. Today, I'm thrilled, excited to be joined by Stephanie Filbay. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jared. I'm very excited to be here.
So I'll call you Steph if you don't mind, Stephanie. My sister's
Yeah.
called Stephanie, so I usually call her Steph. So I might slip up, but anyway, I'll call you Steph. So Steph, I want you to start by introducing yourself to the audience. What's your academic bio? What do you like to do for fun? What's a vaguely normal week look like for you?
Sure. Okay. In terms of a bit of an academic bio, I'm a physio by background. I did my PhD in the area of ACL injuries and long-term outcomes with a particular focus on quality of life. After my PhD, I moved to Oxford in the UK, and I was there for 4 years as a senior research associate. I also spent some months living in Denmark and Sweden and set up some research collaborations with some colleagues there that I still work with quite regularly. And then I applied for an NHMRC investigator grant and moved back to Melbourne in 2020. And I'm currently a senior research fellow at University of Melbourne. In terms of my research, so I mentioned I'm interested in ACL injury. That's really where my main passion lies. And connecting most of my research is probably optimizing outcomes for people that have an ACL injury. I lead a team working on a range of different projects. So, for example, some things we're working on, we're looking at evaluating current management of ACL injury in Australia. We are developing a patient decision aid to inform patients about ACL injury options. We're creating some free online training resources for physios and for patients, and developing strategies to improve outcomes for people with knee OA after ACL injury, as well as some stuff I'm sure we'll discuss today, some work around the potential for ACL rupture to heal and looking at strategies to potentially facilitate healing of ACL rupture. So yeah, that's some of the research that I'm working on at the moment. What else was that outside of work?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it's all about work-life balance, isn't it? Um, so finding the time to be active, I think is really important for me. I've always played a bunch of sports, but it seems the older you get, the harder it is to find time to do that. So when I can, I do a bit of CrossFit and other things like tennis, Aussie rules, water sports, skiing, even basketball. Yeah, lots of different things. I also enjoy being creative, so like painting and drawing if I have the time. I have a 1-year-old daughter, so most of my time's taken up spending time with her, which is great. So in terms of a creative outlet, we've been mainly making animals out of, I don't know if you've seen this soft, colorful clay.
Yeah, I
It's,
have. Yeah.
yeah, so making lots of, random objects and animals out of that, which has been lots of fun.
Cool.
Yes.
Do you
So
do you, do you find yourself applying your creative side into your scientific side with your research?
yeah, I think creativity really drives me, and it's what I really enjoy. In terms of research, I think you can be creative in idea generating, so
Mm.
in coming up with research ideas. You can be creative in disseminating findings, so through infographics or creating presentation slides. And also in an area that I'm moving into now is creating actually educational resources and decision aids for clinicians and patients. So how do they look? How can you be really engaging, and how can you be creative in the way that you translate, your research findings into current practice? So yeah, I think there is some avenues for creativity in a research career. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. How did you end up in Oxford and in Europe doing some research? That's a fascinating career trajectory. How did that all work out?
So most of my things that have happened in my career is generally being in the right place at the right time and meeting the right people. Um, Often over a couple of glasses of wine at a conference. So Oxford came from meeting some researchers from Oxford at a conference in Seattle, an osteoarthritis conference, which led to a 3-month fellowship, which then led to a 4-year position. I actually moved over intending to be there for 3 months, but it just kept going, and I stayed there for a lot longer.
Cool. And what was your experience like there?
Yeah, terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It is really good to get experience of research at different institutions, and as well as I mentioned, Sweden and Denmark, because there are such great physio researchers, OA, ACL researchers out there. So I think forming a network and working together, it's one of the most rewarding aspects of research, is the people you meet and the people you get to work with.
Absolutely. Have you injured your ACL before, Steph?
Yes, I have.
You
Yes,
have. All right. So did
several
that
times.
inspire your interest in this particular injury?
Yeah, definitely. I was already studying physio when I first ruptured my ACL and had a reconstruction. I then re-ruptured it and had a revision surgery, and then I re-ruptured it again, and I
Wow.
didn't have a second revision surgery. So I
Okay.
guess I am ACL deficient. Also
Yeah.
got a really damaged meniscus, and I've got moderate signs of osteoarthritis as well. So yeah,
Gosh.
so I do have some of my own experiences when it comes to ACL injury management, and
Cool.
osteoarthritis after ACL injury as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So your your lived experience is kind of is really important here, not just from because I guess you're kind of invested personally in the outcome of your research. That must be a fascinating position to be in. Do you find yourself kind of when you're doing the research applying this to how you're managing your own kind of need, and also how you would manage possibly your child's hope she doesn't have an ACL injury one day, but she might, or maybe your family?
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a motivation in terms of, knowing what I now know, and I didn't know then. I
Mm,
can look back and see the things that I wish were different, the information I wish I was given, and the options or how I wish they were presented at the time, and what I didn't know then. But in terms of current experience, it is being, a fairly young adult with osteoarthritis that really wants to lead an active lifestyle, which is a lot of people post ACL injury. So actually some of the work we're working on is in that space, and it's looking at how we can find satisfying sport or forms of physical activity for these people who often have competitive needs and have
mm.
taken part in sports half their lives. And I think I have some, personal experience in that as well. And I'm facing some of those challenges in terms of wanting to be active, but having a lot of knee pain and poor knee function at the same time.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting dimension that you bring to the table there with your research. So that's I didn't know that. So that's really cool. All right, so let's get on to the nitty gritty of the conversation. So the ACL rupture is about as sexy as a topic I reckon you can get in musculoskeletal, orthopedic, sports medicine. For some reason, probably because football players get it, and it's an interesting mechanism, and it's an interesting recovery, and it takes a year, so it gets a lot of press coverage usually to get back after an ACL injury. I was taught, and I basically didn't even challenge this assumption that the ACL didn't heal for basically the first 10 years of my career as a physiotherapist, which might say more about me than anything. But the last few years, there's been some evidence that comes in that sort of challenged this, culminating in your fabulous paper, which has just come out quite recently in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. So can you tell us about the healing capacity of the ACL with perhaps a reference to your fabulous paper, which you've just published?
Sure. Yeah, and I think I was also taught that, as a physio, I remember actually that we were taught the ACL, it's intracapsular. When it ruptures, the torn ends get bathed in synovial fluid, so they can't meet and it doesn't heal on its own. And I kind of do remember being taught that. And when we started discussing this, I was really surprised when I looked into the literature how few studies had looked at this and
Mm.
the limitations of those studies. Because it seems quite a pertinent question that you'd think we should have put quite a lot of attention into in terms of research. And that was, the main rationale for looking at this within the Canoon randomized controlled trial. So what we found is that
Oh,
at
is it the
least
Canoon? Sorry, I call it
it
the
is.
Canon. Okay, Canoon. All
Oh,
right.
well,
Yeah.
it could be the canon. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Swedish, but
Yeah.
it's just an acronym. It's
Yeah.
an acronym for.
Kanon for anyone listening. All right, cool.
Yeah, we tend to call it the canoon, but
Yep.
I'm sure you can call it cannon if you
Let's
like.
go with canoe. That's good.
No problem. Yeah. So, uh, if you're familiar with that trial, the trial involved randomizing people with acute ACL rupture to either management with an early ACL reconstruction, followed by rehabilitation, or randomization to initial rehab, where people could then choose to have an optional delayed surgery after trying rehab if they wanted. And about half the people did end up having a delayed surgery in that arm. So what we did is we looked at the MRIs that were taken across a variety of time points. So at baseline, 3 months, 12 months, 2 years, and 5 years. And we looked at the degree of healing of the ACL and MRI. So what we found in those randomized to rehab and optional surgery, at least 1 in 3 people had a healed ACL on MRI 2-year follow-up. So I say at least because that's assuming that those who had delayed surgery had a non-healed ACL at the time of delayed surgery, which we don't really know. So that's a conservative estimate, is at least 1 in 3. And then when we looked, particularly in those people who were only managed with rehab, who didn't decide to have surgery, 53% had a healed ACL on 2-year MRI and 56% on 5-year MRI. But one of the big questions is, is what we're seeing on MRI, does that even relate to knee function? Does it even represent ACL healing? So it was interesting that we found that those with a healed ACL on MRI reported better patient-reported outcomes in terms of sport and recreational function and quality of life compared to those with no healing, but also compared to those randomized to early ACL reconstruction and those who had delayed surgery. Yeah, another kind of interesting finding that I might mention is that although we looked at 2 years as the primary outcome, most people who had signs of healing, it was apparent as early as 3 months on MRI. I think, that's quite interesting. And also those who had delayed ACL reconstruction, very few of them had any signs of healing on 3-month MRI. So, we put a lot of attention into trying to predict who might be a coper with rehab, and it's quite possible that the healing status has something to do with that.
So, okay, so much I want to investigate there. So can you just briefly comment on how you defined healing in the paper or signs of healing?
Sure. Yeah, because there wasn't a lot of guidance around this. It is a relative emerging area of research. So we used the ACL OAS MRI grading system, graded by radiologists, and that has an item that assesses the continuity of an ACL. So typically it's used at baseline, like after an acute injury, where a fully ruptured ACL has a grade 3, which includes complete discontinuity of fibers. So then a grade 0 represents basically a normal appearance, like an uninjured ACL. So full continuity fibers, normal thickness, a normal signal on MRI. And then we had grade 1, which is continuous continuity of fibers, but it can be thickened or have an increased signal. And then a grade 2, which is continuous, but it may be thinned or elongated. So for this study, we considered any continuity of fibers, grade 0 to 2, to represent a degree of healing. And we compared that with outcomes with grade 3. Yeah, does that make sense? So what we're referring to is really continuity of ACL fibers.
Yep.
But they didn't all look exactly the same in terms of their appearance.
Okay. Yeah, you're leading me off track here in a good way. I just want to continue down that road a little bit. Do those who had better healing, like a 1, for example, in terms of the continuity of healing, had better outcomes than the 2, for example, or?
Yeah, so that's an important question, and we couldn't answer that within this particular study because there wasn't enough people or there wasn't enough spread across those grades. Yeah, exactly. So we couldn't look at it within this, but we have looked at this in a different study.
Okay.
Cross bracing protocol. So we might go into a bit of detail around that, but that gives us a bit of an idea about what those different grades might tell us.
Yeah, cool. Okay, we'll go there. We'll go there soon. I want to just hang around here for a little bit. the 3 months milestone is interesting. So ACL healing was observed as early as 3 months. A hypothetical question for you. You probably don't have a definite answer because it's such a young and emerging area. How long, theoretically, could we give someone to heal if they want to take a wait and see non-surgical approach? After a year, if we see no signs of healing, should we perhaps pull the pin? How long would we give it there from your opinion?
Yeah, and it would only be an opinion because we don't have the research yet. You know, we need very large samples to understand that kind of thing and look at and to be able to follow it at multiple time points with MRI, which is quite costly. So we don't know.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, you know, certainly when we're applying the cross bracing protocol, we're thinking like there's an optimal window potentially to facilitate healing, as there is with a lot of injuries. You know, let's talk about it in terms of continuity of fibers. If you've still got a full rupture and those ruptured ends of the ACL haven't met at 6 months after injury, are they then likely to, you know, to regain continuity at 12 months? Probably not. There's some evidence actually showing that the ruptured end can cause like a stump. It can grow over the edge of the fibers, and then it's much less likely to probably heal. So, yeah, so my opinion would be, I think what we may find is that there may be quite an early window where if no signs of healing have happened, and we don't know this yet, but it may be around 3 to 6 months, that very few people may go on then to experience ACL healing.
Yeah.
Just an opinion, though. We need the research.
Yeah, cool. Everything we say here is going to be tainted with uncertainty, possibly. So
sure.
let's just preface that. Okay, cool. So 3 months, we do see signs of healing. In terms of how long we should wait, we don't know. But would it be rarer, in your opinion, again, and I think you've just probably alluded to this, that if somebody has no signs of healing at 3 months, that person may struggle to show any signs of healing later on down the line?
Yeah, I mean, maybe 3 months is too early, right? But I do think there's likely a window. When we discuss a bracing protocol, that may be a bit different because it kind of could potentially accelerate the healing response compared to just rehab. Yes. So, no, I think if there's some continuity of fibers have been restored at 3 months, then that could potentially continue along a spectrum of healing in a positive direction. But we don't yet know if there's no healing at 3 months, whether that person can go on to have healing. But what we do know is from the Canoe trial, that person may be more likely to opt for a delayed surgery.
Yeah.
Which, you know, an interesting thing about the Canoe trial is that they were blinded to their healing status. It wasn't something they were aware of. So that decision to have delayed surgery had nothing to do with being told you have healing or you don't know if you're ACL. It's likely driven by knee function, symptoms, and other factors.
Yeah, no, that blinding design is a real feature of the study. Okay, that's healing. Actually, one more question on healing. I've got a million more questions on healing. What am I talking about? But with this particular topic, so baseline predictors of who may heal. Now, again, I assume you don't have a definite answer here. Can we speculate? Can we hypothesize? Can we conjecture some possible baseline predictors of who may heal? Does age come into it? Does sex or gender come into it? Where do we go from there?
Yeah, so this is a really important question, I think, with potential really important clinical implications. Firstly, we don't have the research yet. We're actually planning a study to look at this. So to look at predictors of who will go on to heal and the grade of healing. We're designing it around the bracing protocol. But specifically in relation to what we can see on MRI in terms of the nature of the ACL graft and other variables, as well as some patient characteristics. So yes, we want to look at age, hypermobility, the type of injury. Clinically, So this is not yet research-based. We are seeing some patterns. So in terms of the bracing protocol, there's now been 260 patients that have been managed by primarily by Tom Cross and his team in Sydney. And within those, we're seeing some, I will say, just clinical observations at the moment, because we're planning on investigating that soon in a study. But some things that may be important could relate to the nature of the ACL rupture, so how disrupted the fibers are and where they're sitting in the intercondylar notch. So are they flipped over? Are they actually displaced and sitting outside of the intercondylar notch? Within the paper that's currently under review, we've found quite a different proportion in terms of partial avulsions at the femoral origin of the ACL. So it could be that those with a partial femoral avulsion may be less likely to experience healing. Again, we don't know yet, but a higher proportion with partial avulsions had a non-heal within that bracing protocol. And other things that may be important is like the gap distance between the ACL. So when you're looking at the MRI, are the torn ends quite separated? Is one of the ends retracted, or are they closer together? Yeah, there's lots of potential options. So we really do want to do research in this area, and we're planning that study at the moment.
Awesome. Yeah, don't give too much away. I just wanted to dig in there a little bit.
Sure.
In terms of a healed ACL or an ACL rupture that shows signs of healing, what, in terms of, if we compare that ACL that shows signs of healing to its pre-injured state, morphologically and functionally, how does that ACL compare to the uninjured ACL? Again, I don't know if you can compare, but can we treat these healed ACLs like an uninjured ACL, or do they not function to that extent? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah. Again, another really important question. In terms of the morphology, we don't know yet. Yeah. So the best thing, or the closest thing we have at the moment that we've looked at, is how that can relate to patient-reported outcomes, to return to sport, to re-injury rates, and how they can compare with reconstruction. Knee laxity measures, so the Lockman's test, pivot shift test, and yeah, patients' perceptions of knee stability as well, and their ability to function with the knee. So they're the things we've looked at. But yeah, which is all we really have in terms of data at the moment. But there will likely need to be studies to look at the morphology and other things. Although the ACL is ruptured, so it's not really a fair comparison to compare that to an uninjured ACL. Because if we compare it to current treatment, where around 90% of people in Australia have ACL reconstruction, then I guess we should be comparing it to the integrity and the strength of an ACL graft and the function of that graft. That's the likely comparison. Yeah. So
and what is that comparison between a healed ACL and a surgical graft, do you think?
There would have to be a lot of we just don't have the research yet to answer that.
Yeah.
Again, if we look at the Canoon trial, activity levels were similar, self-reported sport and recreational function was similar, and knee-related quality of life was similar. The proportion that was satisfied with their current knee state was higher with ACL healing than it was with ACL reconstruction.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't know. I mean, I think that there's a bit of research now looking at the graft maturity and the timeline for graft maturity after an ACL reconstruction. And it may take a lot longer than 12 months. So at that point of returning to sport, the graft may be immature in a lot of cases. I think even with healing of a natural ACL, it may take some time for ligamentisation and other processes to happen. So I don't suggest, 3 months, there's a continuous ACL, go back to sport. I think that would probably be pretty irresponsible.
Yeah.
And we'll need a bit of work around understanding, if it turns out that what we see on MRI does relate closely enough to function, then we'll need a bit of work and research to understand timelines for when it's safe to return to running or sport or other activities.
Yeah, totally. There's a difference between having a functional knee and having, a functional ACL, right? And so I think that's an important distinction. You can get back to activity if you've got a lax ACL on Lockman testing or pivot shift testing or using an arthrometer, but functionally the knee does what you want it to do. And that's possibly all that matters. I want to equate that to shoulder dislocations or recurrent shoulder dislocations, where if you go down a surgical pathway and get a stabilization, you'll probably have less recurrent shoulder dislocations, but quality of life outcomes and often participation in valued activity is not different between the two groups, between a non-surgical and a surgical approach. So if you're really reductionist and myopic in your outcome of, well, is it lax or not lax, or do they dislocate or not dislocate, surgery might be better. But functionally and quality of life and patient acceptable symptom state, which is what you investigated, might be better in the non-surgical, or at least comparable.
Yeah, exactly. And in the ACL literature, knee laxity, as is tested by, passively by a clinician, Lockman's or pivot shift, is poorly correlated with functional stability. So considering that poor correlation, I think it's functional stability that matters most. There's also not great research to show an association between increased knee laxity and OA or poor outcomes, but there is research suggesting that episodes of giving way or episodes of instability are related to poorer knee health in the long term. So I think that's the measure that matters most, is whether the knee is going to be functionally stable.
Total agreement. Let's talk about this cross-bracing protocol that you just referenced and alluded to a moment ago with Tom Cross. I've not read a ton about it, and you mentioned that there is a paper under review. So can you just introduce me and the audience to what this cross-bracing protocol is?
Sure. And you've probably not read a ton about it because it isn't published yet. It's just got, by word of mouth, it's spread quite a bit prior to publication, but it is under review at the moment. So hopefully that won't be too far away. And we will be publishing the full protocol in detail, including physio exercises with the publication. So it will be available hopefully soon. We did publish a conference abstract, which is out there now, but it only provides a very brief snippet of the larger paper. So I think it is probably worth waiting for. But to tell you a bit about it, okay, so the cross-bracing protocol, it attempts to help to facilitate healing of ACL rupture by initially immobilizing the knee at 90 degrees flexion in a brace for 24/7 for 4 weeks initially. And the rationale behind that was that there's evidence to suggest that at 90 degrees and greater of flexion, the torn ends, I can use my hands here, can I? The torn ends of the ACL are in closer proximity at greater degrees of knee flexion. So using the orthopedic principles similar to reduction and fixation, it was hypothesized that by bringing those ruptured ends close together and holding them in that position, it may be able to facilitate healing of ACL rupture. So it involves, as I mentioned, 90 degrees flexion for 4 weeks in a brace. And then at weekly increments, the range of motion is increased within the brace until full range of motion at 10 weeks, and the brace is removed at 12 weeks. It's important to note that that's coupled with standardized physiotherapy throughout the whole brace. So it's not being immobile or letting the muscles just atrophy. It involves different exercises within the available range of motion, as well as contralateral exercises and upper body exercises and other things, hip exercises as well, and ankle plantar flexion. So that will all be within the publication, but that's the theory behind it, and that's it in a snapshot.
Is it non-weight bearing for 10 weeks as well?
No, it's not non-weight bearing. Okay. It's only non-weight bearing with crutches for safety reasons when, for example, the knee's at 90 degrees. But people use other devices like I believe it's the iWalker or a scooter. So they can get around that way. But as soon as they can have enough range of motion to partially weight bear, they're encouraged to do so. As well, they do exercises within the available range, such as bridges or wall squats and other things as well.
Cool.
Yeah. So in terms of our preliminary findings, and what we'll be showing in the paper that's under review at the moment. So that's just reporting outcomes from the first 80 patients with ACL rupture that were managed with the cross-bracing protocol. And what we found using the same criteria for healing as the canoeing trial, the continuity of ACL fibers, at 3-month MRI, when they took the brace off, 90% had a healed ACL on MRI.
Wow.
And so we then compared outcomes between those with higher grades and lower grades. But the comparison groups were a bit different to canoe because we had fewer people with discontinuous. So 90% had healing. So we actually compared a grade 1 with a grade 2 versus 3. So that's a continuous ACL that could be thickened with increased signal versus a discontinuous ACL or a thinned or elongated ACL. So in that comparison, we found that those with higher grades of healing had higher return to sport rates, they had better self-reported knee function, better quality of life, and more of them had a normal knee laxity compared to the opposite side. Specifically, 92% had returned to sport by 12 months compared to 64% in the other group. 64% is more comparison with rates post-reconstruction. The PROMs, the Lisham and the ACL qual, they were taken at 14 months. And then Lockman, 100%. So all patients who achieved the grade 1 heal, if you will, had a normal Lockman's compared to the other side. And 40% with that grade 2 or 3 had a normal Lockman's in comparison. Yeah, so that's what we've found so far. But as I mentioned now, 260 people have been managed with that, and we'll be looking at predictors for healing in that group. As well as reporting, rates of healing in that larger number of people. I guess it's important also to acknowledge re-rupture. So of the 80 people, 11 had re-ruptured their ACL. All of those 11 had returned to sport and pivoting sports. And of those, 4 of those re-ruptured had a grade 1 heal. But of those 4 that had re-ruptured, it was either rugby contact injury, AFL contact injury, or 2 of them were high-speed skiing and cycling accidents. So, yeah, so, I mean, I guess what we would expect, certainly post-reconstruction as well, a higher injury rate that's associated with returning to sport. And because 92% of people with a grade 1 heal return to sport, we are actually going to expect some people to re-injure their ACL. I think what's really interesting actually is of those, most of them then decided to have a reconstruction after they retore that ACL. But 2 people actually wanted to try the brace again for a second time after they ruptured what was previously a continuous ACL, and they achieved a heal a second time after going through the brace.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting because, once we have reconstruction, ACL's removed and we know revision surgery doesn't have great outcomes, but it's possible that an ACL may be able to heal and rupture multiple times without surgery.
Wow, I hadn't even thought of that. That's a really cool feature. So there's that. I'm just thinking how remarkable the human body is, and for so long I doubted it with the ACL, and now it's healing not once but twice in some people. That's so fascinating. And then so the 4 that ruptured in that in the higher grade healing, so 2 were contact and the other 2 were high speed kind of incidents. Is that what you said?
Yeah, accidents. Yeah, so falling off a bike at high speed and a skiing accident. Okay. At quite high speed as well, yeah.
And 90 odd % healed and 90 odd % went back to their pre-injury level of sport.
So that's, sorry, it is quite complicated just talking about it without being able to show you something. But in terms of the grade 1, so that was with a grade 1 heal at 3 months as well, which is quite early. We think 3 months is probably too early for a grade 0 heal. That would be representing an uninjured ACL, completely normal appearance, which some people had progressed to by 6 months.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, but that grade 1 heal was associated. 92% of those people returned to sport. and they reported better patient-reported outcomes, and all of them had a normal Lockman's test compared to the contralateral leg. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a grade 1 heel is a high degree of healing. So you can get back to a grade 0 looking ACL on an MRI after a rupture.
Yeah, we found that in the Canoon as well. But I would say the caveat is using the currently available grading criteria. That's something we're exploring as well, is potentially looking at new ways of classifying ACL, and looking at new features of the ACL in terms of healing. Because it's not something we've looked at before, there's no specific scale that was developed just for that purpose. So we don't really know what it is we need to look for. And in what way is what we're seeing on MRI related to differences in knee function in terms of the spectrum of healing? We don't know yet. So
yeah, for sure.
But what's interesting, sorry, to tie it back in with one of your earlier questions, is it difference in comparison here? So in the Canoon, we found that those with still a ruptured ACL had worse outcomes than those with grade 0, 1, or 2. But in this study, we found actually difference between largely grade 1 and grade 2. So that does suggest, the more normal the appearance, the better the function and the outcome.
The better the healing, the better the outcome. Yeah. Okay. So have you embedded a qualitative study into this cross bracing protocol to figure out how people experience being stuck in a 90 degrees bracing for a period of time?
Yeah. So this was not a planning question, but we have. Yeah, we've done that. And we're just finalizing the analysis.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. We wanted to, explore their experiences, explore the acceptability of the brace, the challenges, their feelings around taking that risk, I guess, trying an untested treatment with the potential that your ACL may or may not heal. And anecdotally, what we're finding, it's not finalized yet or published, is that people are really happy to take that risk and to take that 3 months in the brace or initial 4 weeks at 90 degrees flexion with the chance that it may heal. It was interesting that several people had been through an ACL reconstruction on their opposite knee some time ago, so they had that comparison. They've been through surgery and rehab, and then they've been through the bracing protocol as well. So I think the insights from those people are going to be particularly interesting.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading that too, because that will have such clinical implications, I think, when you're talking to patients about this, how they're going to experience this brace, so on and so forth. It sounds horrific, actually, to have your knee flexed to 90 degrees for 4 weeks. But there's 2 people who chose to go. There's 2 sadistic people who chose to do it again. That's so there you go. So it's not totally horrible by the sounds of it.
No, I think they learn to adapt. Like some people, one patient chose to use a wheelchair to get around, and there's knee scooters and other tools to help you get around during those first 4 weeks. But yeah, I mean, I think that's, as I mentioned, so valuable. Someone that has been through the alternative, say, surgery and has been through that bracing protocol, how does that compare? How does the burden on you and the burden on your mobility and your function and your participation in activities during that time, how do they compare? I think it's going to be quite interesting to look at.
100%. Evidence-based medicine and practice goes beyond RCTs and healing on MRIs. What are these people's lives like when they're going through this injury? So that's a really worthwhile pursuit. So congrats for that. A lot of people forget about qualitative studies. All right, I don't want to take up too much of your time, Steph. I could talk to you all day. I've got a couple more questions. I just want you to summarize basically what are the clinical implications of all this research? The ACL can heal. The better the ACL healing, possibly the better the outcomes. ACL surgery might not be better than a non-operative approach to ACL rupture. How do we take all of this information that we're seeing emerging in the literature and apply it to our N=1 patient in front of us from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's important to mention that even before this research relating to ACL healing, the best available evidence, so 2 clinical trials, showed similar outcomes on average compared to ACL reconstruction and initial management with rehabilitation. And that was before we've even considered or looked at ACL healing. We know that some people will start rehabilitation but they will then benefit from surgery. And those people who then cross over and have surgery have similar outcomes to people who have early surgery. There's some evidence to suggest they can even have better outcomes because prehabilitation, or having a period of rehab, of strengthening, of allowing the knee to come down, has been associated with better outcomes post-surgery. So in that regard, there's kind of nothing to lose for a lot of people. Timing can be important. So if you do try rehab but decide to have surgery, you've added a few months onto your total rehab timeline. Assuming, say, that you make that decision at 3 months, but if you go on and make that decision at 6 months or later, then it is going to add to the overall timeline that you can get back to sports and other activities.
I want to emphasize that. That's a really crucial point. So even if you choose to go down a non-surgical route initially, and then you change your mind at some point down the line, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it may be, that's not associated with negative clinical outcomes if you change your mind and then choose to have surgery. In fact, it might be associated with better outcomes. Have I misinterpreted what you're saying there, or is that accurate?
The clinical trials, so say the Canoon trial, found no difference in outcomes between those that started rehab and decided to have delayed surgery, those that stayed with rehab, and those with early reconstruction. And that was a wide range of outcomes at both 2 and 5 year follow-up. There's a different body of research, non-clinical trial data, several studies, at least 3, that have shown that a period of prehabilitation can improve post-operative outcomes. So yes, but I think the caveat is we know that we need to protect the knee from further injury, in particular the meniscus. So the meniscus, I think once you injure your meniscus certainly quite badly, you can have poor outcomes, including a high risk of osteoarthritis. So with that rehab arm, it's really important that the rehabilitation is supervised by someone experienced and that it's been done in a safe environment. I mean, you hear stories of people that were doing rehab and they thought, oh, my knee felt great, so I went and played soccer at 2 months. And I gave way and I injured my meniscus. So that person shouldn't have been playing sport at 2 months after injury. And it's not necessarily a reflection of the quality of rehab, but rather that they were doing something too high risk too soon. And that's similar with reconstruction. You're not going to go and play soccer 2 months after an ACL reconstruction because the graft is likely to re-rupture as well. So you do need to protect the knee. I wouldn't suggest doing rehab, being a person who has ongoing instability and just being like, oh, well, I'm just going to play sport and damage my knee and let it give way and damage the meniscus, because we don't want that for anyone. But trialing rehab in the first instance to see then if you are going to go on and achieve a stable knee to be able to play sport and do the things you want to do, I think is a good option for most people, unless you don't have that, 3 months to play with. But on the upside, if you are successful with rehabilitation, you may actually be able to get back to sport sooner than having surgery. Yeah. So it's a risk. It's a bit of a gamble, really, in terms of the timeline. It could take longer, but it could also be faster.
Yeah, just on the timeline there, if you don't mind, this whole thing about it's usually 12 months after ACL surgery, and the longer you wait, typically, reconstruction, the better it gets. I think if you wait 9 months and beyond or something, the outcomes are a little bit better for re-rupture or something like that. What's the average time to return to play in this cross bracing protocol, if you don't mind giving away some information on that in terms of how long do people take to get back to their sport on average?
So that 92% in the ones with a grade 1 heel, which was 50% of people had that grade 1 and 50% had 2 or 3. Anyway, yeah, that was
it's a lot of percentages yet.
I know, sorry, it's hard to I know. It is hard to convey.
2 studies, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. We need a bit of a mind map here, don't we, to assist. But yeah, so that was for 12 months, the proportion that had returned to sport at that time point.
Okay, yeah.
We haven't yet followed these people over a longer period of time.
Yeah.
But the thing about this data, it was collected as part of clinical practice. So things were learnt along the way, and some people just returned to sport a lot earlier than others, against advice from the physio and others, because they felt great and their knee felt great.
How quick?
So yeah. Some of those with re-rupture, I think it was 2 to 3, had
Yeah,
returned to
wow.
sport earlier than before they were cleared to by the physio.
Yeah,
So
wow.
before they'd done the return to play testing, and then they had re-injured.
Yeah, that's quick.
So yes. Anyway, you have to see the full paper for all the
Yeah.
details, but yeah, I think there's benefit in delaying return to high risk sports irrespective of treatment.
Yeah.
We know with ACL reconstruction, once you rupture your graft, you're at really high risk of having a very poor outcome.
Mm,
There's a lot of evidence to show that revision
mm,
surgeries don't have great outcomes, and re-revision surgeries, so the third surgery, has even worse outcomes. And that's actually quite common and increasing in frequency in Australia with each year, is a number of people having revision surgeries. So we know that return to sport testing can reduce the risk of re-rupture after ACL reconstruction. So that can be one means of potentially bringing that risk down a bit. And although a lot of patients don't want to consider it, it should at least be brought up as an option, is, changing to a lower risk form of physical
mm,
activity,
mm,
because it, could have important implications for osteoarthritis and knee health in the future. Some patients will say, no way, all they want to do is get back to footy, get back to soccer. But others may, take that information on board and make an informed decision to maybe change what it is that they're doing.
mm.
Yeah.
Cool. So, okay, I've got one more question on ACL
Sure.
healing,
Yeah.
and then that might be it. No guarantees though. Natural history of ACL healing, if left unattended, like not doing a cross bracing protocol, not doing anything, just living your life. Do we have any data on that?
No.
Okay.
Is the easy answer. So
Yeah.
canoe, so obviously the difference, one's using a bracing protocol. The canoe was really quite intensive rehab from the get-go without any thought about ACL healing. So that alone is quite different. Anecdotally, you hear stories, and in some of my qualitative studies, about people on surgical waiting lists. They've gone in to have the surgery. I interviewed someone recently for a study that was on a public waiting list, went to have the surgery, had that anesthetic, and woke up and they said, oh, we went into your knee and your ACL had healed itself. And so
What?
you don't need to have that reconstruction. And that can happen. And that was someone that wasn't doing rehab, during that period. But I think you raise an important question as well when we're looking at when we're going to design a clinical trial comparing healing between rehab alone and use of the brace. But that is also an important consideration. What if you do nothing? Where does that sit? But I don't know that we can really get ethics for for a treatment arm doing nothing when it comes to ACL injury. But
you just have to go and do a retrospective kind of study, recruit all the people in the world that's ruptured their ACL and done nothing about it, hey, and see what happens.
Yeah, well, they're not likely to have the MRI data, unfortunately. But
yeah, no, exactly. It would 100%. It'd still be hard to do. I would bet though it would be nowhere near 90 odd %. And that's my opinion. That you don't have to speak to that, but that would be quite surprising to me.
Yeah, but I mean, just because they're not doing rehab, what are they doing? And often in that proportion of people that don't have treatment, people are doing, I'm not going to say irresponsible things, but you got people running around on it, still playing soccer without an ACL and putting themselves in those high risk situations. I mean, what would be interesting is if you just said to someone, avoid these activities and come back to me in 3 months' time. We do not recommend this, by the way, but from a physiological perspective, it would be interesting to see how many of those people experience healing of the ACL.
If you had your time over, Steph, what would you do with your ACL?
I'm a little bit biased because I had a poor surgical outcome, and my knee was never great after surgery. It was always swollen. It was always painful, which, is a fairly common outcome for a lot of people. Some people have great outcomes with surgery, but most people say the knee was never the same after an ACL injury. So I wish someone would have given me the option of trying rehab, because I definitely would have taken that. And I may or may not have had a successful outcome, but through the surgical route, I've turned up having a really bad outcome, and now, osteoarthritis for the rest of my life, and I'll probably have to have a knee replacement by the time I'm 40 or 50 or, so, but that's of course a biased opinion because I've been through this pathway. Had I had reconstruction at 18 and was able to play sport the rest of my life with no problems, then I probably would have thought it was the best treatment in the world. So
yeah.
We
Yeah.
we're actually along. I think it's relevant to point out we're developing a patient decision aid for ACL injury management at the moment, and we've done a survey of current practice in Australia to inform that. But the reason for that is to have a resource that clinicians can use with patients, but also patients can access themselves, that will help to delve through all this complicated evidence and literature when it comes to ACL injury management. It'll provide the pros and cons of both options, the risks and benefits, the likely outcomes, so that they can make an informed decision that aligns with their lifestyle, their preferences, and their goals. So hopefully it's not too far away, but we'll make that freely available when it's complete.
No, that will be super important. Steph, the big question now is, what book are you reading or what TV show are you watching right now?
Oh, gosh. I don't have a lot of time, I must admit, to do either of those things. I can recommend a couple of books which I've enjoyed reading. Books by Norman Doidge. So,
oh yeah, The Brain That Changes Itself, and
and The Brain's Way of Healing is the other one. Quite thought-provoking, and I think really useful for anyone that's in a clinician, especially in terms of neuroplasticity and what's possible through neuroplasticity in the brain. I guess it is quite topical today's talk, but I hadn't really made that connection. And also Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Have you read that one?
Yeah, classic. Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually found every now and then I use an app called Blinkist. I don't know if you've heard of that. Yeah, so it summarizes books in under 15 minutes, which sounds a bit crude, but it's actually quite useful if you're busy. Non-fiction books. And it can also point you in the direction of books you're really interested in, and then you can spend the time to read the whole book as well. I find that quite useful personally.
I use that. I use sorry to interrupt there. I used the principles of Kahneman's book when I'm triggered by something on the internet and I get that like immediate response and I'm like, I just want to like comment or I want to say this, and I'm like, I just breathe, is it really going to change? Blah, 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 blah. So real life application there.
Yeah, right. And there's a lot of applications for researchers and clinicians, I think, from that book, which is, it's behavioral economics, but it applies it to real world situations, doesn't it?
Totally.
In terms of TV programs, gosh, depends on the mood that I'm in, of course. But if I'm in a mood and I just want something very light, I don't mind. I don't know what the genre is, but these sort of creative art competition shows. So there's like one Portrait Artist of the Year. I don't know if you've seen it, it's British. Great Interior Design Challenge. It's
cool.
A British one. I don't watch them often, but something like that I find quite entertaining. It's cool to see how people do stuff, and probably draws upon my creative side and my competitive side, perhaps. I don't know. But I also actually don't mind a bit of Q&A. Dateline is interesting too.
Amazing.
Yeah, keep up with current affairs. So
good on you.
Yep.
Yeah. Q&A is not on Netflix, guys. It's ABC here in Australia.
Quite right. I did the latest movie I watched. I think it was called The Swimmers. Have you seen that one?
Oh, it's on my to watch list. It looks good. Do you recommend it?
I do. Yeah, definitely worth a watch. Yeah, it's good.
It's German, right?
Gosh, I don't know if
Northern
it's German,
European or something. Yep.
Yeah, it follows the life of, her name's Yusra Madini, I believe. So it follows the life of her and her refugee. So it's based on a true story. Sorry, her and her sister who were refugees in Syria. And she's a swimmer who then ended up being a refugee, moving to Germany. That's probably the German connection there. And then swimming in the Rio Olympics for the refugee team. So it's definitely worth a watch. I think it's quite a good movie.
Cool.
Yep.
Any others?
Oh gosh. No.
The Wiggles with your 1-year-old?
I wish it was the Wiggles. It's Miss Rachel. Have you heard of Miss Rachel?
No idea who that is.
Oh, you're lucky there. No, it's, oh gosh. So Miss Rachel is a speech pathologist. I'm going to say, look, she's either Canadian or American. She has millions and millions and millions of views on all her videos. Yeah, look it up if you haven't heard of her. But my
Okay.
daughter absolutely loves her. So yeah, unfortunately, that's what she likes to watch. So it's
Cool.
educational. It's very educational.
If she's a speechy, that sounds great. It's better than my boy who just wants to watch monster trucks on repeat all day. So I'll take that. Steph, finally, where can people find you and your work? Are you on the socials? Where do we find all about you?
Yeah, I'm mainly on Twitter. And that is where I post all our research papers, invitations to take part in our research, as well as where I'll like share our resources. So the free training for clinicians and patients and the patient decision aid. So my Twitter, what do you even call it? My Twitter handle, yes, my Twitter handle is at Steph Filbay. So no dots, just my name. Yes, and you can get in touch with me that way. If you're interested in some of my research papers, you can Google me on Google Scholar and they'll provide links to the papers, or ResearchGate. Or also, I'm sure I'm on the University of Melbourne website as well. And my links to my papers will be available there as well.
Cool. And I'll link all of that in the show notes. Steph Filbay, thank you very much.
Thanks. It's been really enjoyable. Thanks for the invitation.